versus Verhoeven, that was very close to being the biggest upset in boxing since Mike Tyson versus Buster Douglas, or rather Buster Douglas over Mike Tyson. That was a great game plan from Verhoeven. I think that Verhoeven clearly has a dedicated boxing style that you just don't see in his kickboxing career, because of course when I heard kickboxer versus boxing fight, like I said in my preview video, I immediately just think range finding, like how does this affect range, right? How is this, and Verhoeven didn't give a shit about range. Verhoeven fought this fight like, and I'm not kidding, a 6'6" heavyweight Henry Armstrong. If you've ever seen footage of Henry Armstrong, the fighter from the 50s, who many consider to be like the greatest pound-for-pound fighter of all time, up there with Ali and Sugar Ray Robinson and Harry Greb and shit like that, right? He would always move his arms. He was pumping his fist, right? While he's just moving forward, twitching his shoulders, shoulder framing, constantly always had his chin tucked, but was always moving his hands. He kind of had this guard that you just don't see him. Well, it's what Rico did today, how he's kind of literally, I would describe it as pumping your guard, like, you know, right? Pumping your guard all the time and just hand faking, right? And it took a lot of energy out of him. And that was something that is, you know, a person who watches fights all the time, I'm looking at instantly. When I see how much energy Verhoeven is expending doing this, I'm like, okay, Usyk is having a really hard time getting through this guy. He's got a tough guard to get through. He is tough. He's got a very close stance. His chin is low. He has decided, Verhoeven, to make this fight really, really tough for Usyk. And this was one of the toughest fights of Usyk's entire career. It might have been the toughest fight of Usyk's entire career because, again, in a vacuum, and part of the way I scored this fight, and I think a lot of people are going to disagree with the way I scored this fight because I had this fight scored the way they did in the arena, apparently, a lot closer than I think a lot of people thought. And the main reason why is because Verhoeven is 6'6". He's moving forward extremely aggressively, and like he's constantly moving his hands. He's constantly showing, you know, Usyk angles. He's clearly a very, very gifted boxer. It's sort of the opposite of what I said was going to happen, where you know, taking away his legs, Verhoeven, it's going to cause him a bunch of confusion and change, you know, the way that he views range finding, the way that he views distance, the way that he even eventually views striking, and it's going to get him knocked out. And that is not at all what happened. Taking away Verhoeven's legs almost seemed to make him, to free him up, right? He was like, oh, finally I get to box. I just get to box. I don't have to worry about all that stupid shit with my legs anymore. I just get to box and kick ass. And that is exactly how Verhoeven fought this fight. He was extremely aggressive, really at all opportunities. He'd get Usyk against the ropes, land extra shots. He was just fighting like an energetic fighter. The way that he fought reminds me a lot of Sebastian Hernandez versus Junto Nakatani. And, of course, Brandon Figueroa versus Nick Ball, or these are larger fighters fighting smaller fighters who just decided to fight a relentless pressure fight regardless of their reach advantage. And it was a very bold plan for all three of them, to differing final results for all three of them. And Verhoeven falls short here, but in a different way. You know, Figueroa won in a knockout in the 12th round. Hernandez, in my opinion, was robbed on the scorecards against Nakatani, and Verhoeven here, to be honest with you, in my opinion, gasses out in the 11th round. That is really how I saw it. I'm sorry, you can be mad at that and be like, oh, Rico got robbed, it was a bad stoppage. It was a bad stoppage. The 12th round should have started. If that round, 11th round, ends 10-8, my scorecard reads 104 to 104. Now, I'm not kidding. I had every single round from round 4 to round 9 labeled as close. This was actually a really hard fight to score. People were wondering why, because most people had most of those rounds scored for Rico because he's the one moving forward. Like I said, Rico is 6'6", moving forward very aggressively. I'm going to score Usyk's counterpunching with admittedly a little bit of bias in this fight, because, not bias towards Usyk, but bias towards the smaller person and bias towards the counterpuncher and bias towards the better looking puncher. And Usyk was the better looking puncher in this fight. He was the more natural looking boxer for the entire fight. So I kind of disagreed with people saying that he was getting outboxed. I didn't really see him as getting outboxed. What he did look like was he's getting old. He looked like a 39-year-old. His stomach was flat, which isn't something I tend to go on about, but it's interesting. That Verhoeven was definitely the person with the more pronounced abdominal muscles in this fight. I'm used to Usyk being pretty jacked, and he seemed a little flabby, which is interesting, especially in the context of the fight, right? It's not something that I really particularly give a fuck about, but like in the context of the fight, it matters a ton because it shows that like Usyk may have not been taking this fight terribly seriously. I mean, it's a goofy fight. Like I said, it's at the pyramids of Giza. It's a pretty easy fight to not take seriously, right? To be honest with you. And Verhoeven took this fight as serious as you possibly could have. For Verhoeven, this was the fight of his life, very, very clearly. And I think Usyk did not anticipate that. I think a lot of people did not anticipate that. And I wouldn't be surprised to see either this fight get rematched or this fight to, you know, eventually or Verhoeven to get further shots in the heavyweight division, or for even boxers to call out Verhoeven. What I definitely expect is for boxers to call out Usyk because he looked bad. He looked old. That was the worst performance of Usyk's career. You know, you can rank it amongst his hardest fights, but it's ranked amongst his hardest fights because it was one of his worst ever performances. But yeah, this definitely changes the narrative around the heavyweight division. It definitely changes the narrative around Usyk. It makes the whole heavyweight division seem way, way more open now if what we have here is an aging Oleksandr Usyk. Because to be honest, it's either aging or he just didn't put up enough work in camp, which doesn't really seem like Usyk's thing. But like I said, it didn't look like his muscles were as pronounced as they used to be in his previous fights, which again, I don't care about physiques really, but when you put on a substandard performance, I'm going to notice something like that, because there really wasn't a whole lot, because there really weren't a whole lot of like hints leading into this fight, right? Like you couldn't pick a lot about this fight other than, you know, the basic boxing logic of it coming in, right? The fighters didn't give a whole lot, and that's part of why I think, I ended up being so surprised by this Verhoeven performance. And it was one of those things where, you know, he starts out well and it just keeps going. He's just continuing with this style where you're like, man, he really does have a better gas tank. And I think maybe Verhoeven to a certain extent realized that the sport of boxing, you know, compared to the rounds that he has to put in kickboxing, 5-round fights, this really is an ultimate test of endurance. And he clearly viewed it that way. And I think that if there was a really intense endurance focus in, you know, a 6'6" fighter like Verhoeven, who again, he's got this new offensive skill set basically that he's playing with and toying with here, having removed kicking entirely. Now he just gets to box. He's got this whole level of freedom, and he's, you know, focusing not just on his striking skills, but also focusing very heavily on endurance in the camp. And if Usyk didn't focus heavily on endurance, if he just did his usual endurance work, if he isn't actually compensating, right, for his aging body in his endurance training, then he's probably actually getting more tired. And that could be it. Overtraining actually could really be a thing here for Usyk as well, right? Now, the muscle definition doesn't suggest that, but I've never been 39 years old, so I don't know. And his body has been through a lot, and this is another fight where, you know, he got beat up a lot. He got beat up pretty badly. And I'm definitely worried for the future of Alexander Usyk's career at this point, because I think that other fighters, if I was Daniel Dubois, even if I was Fabio Wardley, I think I'd kind of be, you know, happy. Maybe not Wardley. Wardley is a particularly bad mismatch with Usyk, but if I was Ajit Kabayel is smiling somewhere, man. Ajit Kabayel might be a future world champ. Also, really interestingly, I mean, it was obviously hard to get through to the body there, but Usyk, he really only punched relentlessly to the head in this fight. He didn't really bite down on his mouthpiece and really dedicate to getting into Verhoeven's gut at any point in the fight either, which I thought was interesting, as Usyk is typically seen as just an investor to the body throughout the fight. He didn't really do that much in this one. But the venue actually impressed me. It was a little more of a like VIP type of thing. There were a ton of, you know, figures from the boxing world there. Terrence Crawford, Canelo, and Triple G sitting next to each other. Anthony Joshua. It was a big event. Shiraz blew away Begic on the undercard. By the way, that was brutal. Begic didn't really belong in there with Shiraz, to be honest. You know, he's been a guy who's been looking for a world level fight his whole career. He got one, and you know, he didn't really get shown the levels, because I think Shiraz is honestly like, he's a world level guy, but he's just kind of broken. He's an absolute weight bully at super middleweight, and I'm not afraid to say it. It maybe isn't to Sebastian Fundora extent, but it's pretty bad. You know, it's most of his fights, like I said, are beatdowns with like a vertical element. They're vertical beatdowns. He literally beats you down. And that's what happened to Begic tonight. But yeah, I'm really impressed by Rico Verhoeven. I think it goes to show what size plus pressure can do in any weight class, especially when it's combined with endurance, right? And at the end of the day, it was the tight technical punching from Usyk that won the day, and ultimately that actually kept the fight closer to me than I think a lot of people had it. And there's another weird thing I think when it comes to scoring this fight, is that if you actually rewatch this fight, it's something that I noticed the first time, luckily, that usually I don't notice this in a fight, but it was close, so I was paying extra attention to the foot placement, right, to who was actually controlling the ring, because Usyk's footwork really didn't look that good in this fight. It looked bad. It's one of the things why I'm saying he looked old. He looked a little slow just in general, right, and footwork is one of the most important ways that shows in the ring. And while, yeah, it's true, Verhoeven spent a lot of this fight moving Usyk back and walking Usyk down. Usyk was standing in the middle of the ring, actually, for a pretty significant portion of this fight, and was actually maybe not walking. He did walk Verhoeven back quite a bit and push Verhoeven back quite a bit. He had quite a few moments, actually, just not anywhere near as much as you would expect, and Verhoeven determined a lot more of the fight than I think you would probably expect. And if you watch this fight and you sort of say, okay, Verhoeven is a 6'6", pretend he's just not a kickboxer, right? He's a 6'6" career heavyweight. Just make up a record in your head, some scary record for a 6'6" Dutch, right, heavyweight who just walks people down and moves to pressure fighter, relentless forward pressure. Think about how you would have analyzed this fight going in. You would have analyzed the fight totally differently. The Verhoeven moving forward and constantly pressuring wouldn't have surprised you, and you would score the fight similar to how I did and similar to how they scored it in the ring. A little closer, a little more even, because I'm the straw man I'm kind of making here and talking to is I saw most people had, you know, the Mike Coppinger scorecard, which I believe was like, you know, I think it had Usyk winning maybe one of the first 10 rounds, right? It was a total blowout for Verhoeven where Usyk needed a knockout. And my scorecard was a lot closer. I'll show it on screen at some point in this video, if not throughout every time I talk about the scoring. But yeah, guys, let me know, do you think that Usyk is getting old? Do you think that he just had a bad training camp? Or do you think that Verhoeven is a lot better than you thought? Or do you think that it's a mix of all three? And I will see you guys next time.